Running an EU e-commerce business, your terms of service are not a legal formality you copy-paste from another store. They are either your bulletproof risk infrastructure or a regulatory liability waiting to be invoked against you. And in 2026, getting them wrong exposes you to fines of up to 4% of your annual turnover. Today, we'll show you exactly where EU law strikes down e-commerce TOS clauses and how to draft yours so they actually hold up. First, a quick disclaimer. This video is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. If you'd like a tailored review of your e-commerce terms of service, your checkout flow, or your refund policy, our team is just one click away. Hey everyone, Robert here, legal consultant, licensed tax advisor, and founder of Clickwrap Consulting. We work day in, day out with e-commerce sellers, dropshippers, Amazon merchants, and direct-to-consumer brands operating into the EU. And we've seen the same clauses voided over and over again, costing operators five-figure refund waves, regulator findings, and platform suspensions. Today's video is the first of two on the terms of service. This one focuses on e-commerce. The follow-up will cover SaaS, where the rules look similar on the surface but bite very differently. Your TOS sit at the intersection of at least four binding EU regimes, plus a fifth that's coming. The Unfair Contract Terms Directive 93/13, applicable to every business-to-consumer contract, set the fairness test that decides whether your clauses survive a court challenge. The Consumer Rights Directive 2011/83, as amended by the Modernization Directive 2019/2161, governs your pre-contract disclosures, your withdrawal rights, and your checkout flow. The Sales of Goods Directive 2019/771 sets the statutory conformity warranty you cannot contractually limit, and the Digital Services Act, fully applicable since the 17th of February 2024, adds transparency obligations for any online marketplace and imposes a flat ban on dark pattern interfaces. On the horizon, the Digital Fairness Act is expected as a Commission proposal in Q4 2026. That one will tighten subscription cancellation flows, drip pricing, and contract design more broadly. So if your current TOS were drafted before 2022, or if you've been quietly localizing a US template, you're operating in a regulatory environment that no longer matches your document. Let's start with the fairness test, because every other compliance question in your TOS flows from it. Under Article 3, Paragraph 1 of Directive 93/13, a contractual term that hasn't been individually negotiated, which is essentially every clause in your TOS, is unfair if contrary to the requirement of good faith. It causes a significant imbalance in the parties' rights and obligations to the detriment of the consumer. That's the textbook test, but the operational reality is simpler. If a clause shifts risk, cost, or inconvenience onto the consumer in a way they couldn't reasonably have anticipated and didn't actually negotiate, it's a risk. Two things follow. First, under Article 5 of the same directive, your TOS must be drafted in plain, intelligible language. Where a term is ambiguous, the contra proferentum rule applies. The interpretation most favorable to the consumer prevails. So legalese isn't a defense, it's a liability. Second, under Article 6, Paragraph 1, unfair terms aren't binding on the consumer. The rest of the contract survives only if it's capable of continuing without the offending clause. The CJEU has been increasingly willing to strike entire contracts where the unfair term goes to the heart of the bargain. So a single bad clause doesn't just lose you that clause, it can unravel the whole agreement. The annex to Directive 93/13 contains an indicative list of terms that may be considered unfair, what practitioners call the grey list. This isn't exhaustive, and being on the list isn't an automatic kill, but if your TOS contains any of these clauses, expect them to be challenged. The most common ones we see voided in e-commerce. Terms excluding or limiting your liability for death or personal injury caused by your act or omission. Those are flat unfair under the Annex. Terms limiting the consumer's legal rights against you for non-performance, for example, blanket all sales final clauses that try to override the statutory 2-year conformity warranty or the 14-day withdrawal right. Terms binding the consumer to obligations they had no real opportunity to read before signing. Unilateral modification rights, the classic "we may change these terms at any time without notice" clause, which is unfair unless you give the consumer reasonable notice and a free right to terminate. Automatic renewal clauses with unreasonable short cancellation windows. Forfeiture of advance payments without equivalent compensation when you're the one terminating, excessive penalty clauses, and forum selection or arbitration clauses that enforce the consumer to litigate in a jurisdiction that's inconvenient for them. Those are often struck both under 93/13 and under Article 19 of the Brussels 1-bis regulation, which gives consumers the right to sue in their home member state. The fix isn't remove all of these clauses. Many of them are commercially necessary. The fix is drafting them in a way that respects the fairness test, proportionate notice periods, reciprocal obligations where possible, transparent calculation methods, and exclusions calibrated to what's actually reasonable. Now, to the part most e-commerce operators get partially right and fully wrong at the same time. For your TOS to bind the consumer has to validly agree to them. EU law is increasingly precise about what valid agreement looks like online. Clickwrap, where the user actively ticks an unticked box or actively clicks a button that explicitly says "I accept the terms of service," is the standard of the CJEU validated in the case C-322/14 for the purposes of jurisdiction clause incorporation. BrowseWrap, where the user is deemed to accept by mere use of the site, is consistently held insufficient. So if your TOS are linked in your footer with "by using this site you accept our terms" notice, you don't have a binding contract. You have a footer. For the checkout button itself, Article 8, Paragraph 2 of the Consumer Rights Directive is unambiguous and weaponized, where a distance contract concluded by electronic means places the consumer under an obligation to pay. The order button must be labeled "Order with obligation to pay" or a corresponding unambiguous formulation. If your button says "Complete," "Confirm," "Submit," or "Place order" without the payment obligation language, the consumer is not bound by the contract at all. Read that sentence again, because it's the most expensive misunderstanding in EU e-commerce. The order isn't just hard to enforce, it's not enforceable, full stop. Test your checkout button today. And the second checkout flow trap, bundling the TOS acceptance with your privacy policy and your marketing consent into a single tick box. That's a GDPR violation under Article 7, Paragraph 2 of Regulation 2016/679. Consent must be specific and unbundled, and it can taint the validity of your TOS acceptance under 93/13 because the consumer wasn't given a real choice on each component. Free boxes, free separate consents. Always. If you sell across the EU or you target EU consumers from outside, your choice of law and jurisdiction clauses face 2 layers of override. Under Article 6 of the Rome I regulation, even a valid choice of law clause cannot deprive the consumer of the mandatory protection of the law of their habitual residence. So if you're drafted These terms are governed by the laws of Delaware, for example, and your shipping to Lyon French consumer law still applies to your French customer. Under Articles 17 to 19 of the Brussels 1 bis regulation, the consumer can sue you either in your country of establishment or in their own. Your forum selection clause cannot strip them of that right. Add the geo-blocking regulation EU 2018/302, which prohibits discrimination based on nationality, place of residence, or place of establishment within free covered scenarios under Article 4. Sales of goods without physical delivery by the trader, electronically supplied services, and services received at a physical location. Important nuance often missed, the regulation does not require you to deliver to every member state. You can lawfully limit your shipping zones. What it prohibits is refusing a customer from another member state who is willing to accept the same delivery terms. For instance, a French customer who accepts collection in Slovenia or organizes their own forwarding must be allowed to purchase on the same terms as a Slovenian customer. The Commission opened a formal call for evidence on the regulation in February 2025, and the European Court of Auditors published Special Report 03/2025 on unjustified geo-blocking with follow-up actions targeted by end of 2026. So enforcement is intensifying and not loosening. One number worth memorizing. Article 8b of Directive 93/13, added by the Modernization Directive 2019/2161 and applicable since the 28th of May 2022, requires member states to ensure penalties for unfair terms violations are effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. For widespread infringements with a union dimension under the Consumer Protection Cooperation Regulation, fines must reach at least 4% of traders' annual turnover in the member states concerned, or 2 million euros where turnover information isn't available. The same regime applies to Consumer Rights Directive infringements under Article 24. National regulators across the EU have been actively using this power since 2022, and TOS audits have become a routine first stop in cross-border consumer protection investigations. So, what does a defensible setup look like? A TOS document drafted in plain, intelligible language with reciprocal obligations rather than unilateral rights wherever possible. A Clickwrap incorporation mechanism with a separate, unticked acceptance box, free boxes for TOS privacy and marketing, an order with obligation to pay button labeled exactly that way in your customer's language on every checkout flow, a withdrawal information block compliant with the Consumer Rights Directive with the model withdrawal form attached, a statutory warranty acknowledgement that doesn't try to limit the 2-year conformity guarantee, modification clauses with reasonable notice and a free termination right, choice of law clauses drafted with awareness that mandatory consumer protection of the buyer's home jurisdiction will override them, and a complaints handling policy displayed at the same level of prominence as your sales pitch. Get this architecture right and your refund disputes shrink, your enforcement exposure drops, and your platform listings stop being suspended. Quick recap. Your e-commerce TOS sit under Directive 93/13 for fairness, the Consumer Rights Directive for disclosure and withdrawal, the Sales of Goods Directive for warranty, and the DSA for online marketplaces and other providers of online platforms. The fairness test is good faith plus significant imbalance. Fail it and the term is void, with the rest of the contract surviving only if it can. Clickwrap binds, browser wrap doesn't. Your order button must say order with obligation to pay. Cross-border buyers carry their home law and home court with them, and penalties for widespread infringements run up to 4% of turnover. The Digital Fairness Act is coming in late 2026 and will tighten the screws further. Better to clean up your TOS now than to retrough it under deadline pressure. Your terms of service look like a paperwork item. They're actually one of the highest leverage pieces of risk infrastructure your business has. And the operators we see thrive in EU e-commerce treat their TOS as a competitive moat, not a download from a template site. If you're not 100% sure your e-commerce terms of service, your checkout flow, or your withdrawal policy would survive a real challenge, that's exactly what we do. Book a free 30-minute, no-strings-attached consultation through the link in the description, and we'll walk through your specific risk points. And keep an eye out for the next video in this mini-series, where we tackle TOS for SaaS. Different rules, different traps, different drafting playbook. Hit like, share this with your operations and your colleagues, and subscribe for more compliance insights. Thanks for watching, and remember, compliance with the law prevents the flaw. Till next time.